Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Tinnitist TV. Today, I'm talking to Rik Emmett of Triumph. What a difference a year makes. When I last spoke to Rik less than 12 months ago, the former singer-guitarist of the legendary can rock power trio was happily living the life of a semi-retired rocker turned author. And he flat out insisted, as he has for decades, that he had zero interest in reuniting with his old bandmates or going back out on the road in any major way. Well, that all changed in December when Triumph suddenly announced a 50th anniversary tour slated for this summer. What changed his tune? How does he feel about restarting the rock and roll machine? And will he wear spandex? During a recent snowstorm, Emmett zoomed in from his Ontario home to talk reunions, rehearsals, his timely new poetry collection leaning into it, and his plans for Triumph in the 21st century. Enjoy. It's been a little under a year since we last spoke about the previous book, and oh my, what a big difference a year makes in a lot of things in your life. So we've got a few things that we need to talk about today.
Yeah.
And I kind of thought maybe they were very disparate things, but after checking out the book, they're not so disparate. But let's start with the thing that I know your publisher would want us to start with, which is the new book of poetry, leaning into it. I just got it a couple of days ago, so I'm not even going to pretend that I've had a ton of time to really, dig in and absorb it. But even just the superficial time I've had to spend with it, I think a lot of people will get the wrong impression when they hear, oh, Rik Emmett's put out a book of poetry. They're going to think, what? Another book of poetry in your case. But they'll still think, what's this got to do with anything? And is this just a bunch of airy-fairy musings on things? And it's not. It's very grounded. It's very topical. It's very political. It's personal, obviously. But it's not just a bunch of random verses about trees and rocks and things like that. It's almost like op-eds in free verse, you know?
Yes. Yes.
But you tell me about all this stuff. What was sort of the impetus of this? Where did this all come from? What's going on here?
Yeah. Well, first of all, this was a book that I wrote when COVID was sort of, really happening. So, and this is the weird thing about sort of publishing and time, and being an artist in a modern world, where there's stuff that's instant. I can shoot a little video here in my studio and have it up on the internet and worldwide in minutes. But the world of writing a book of poetry, the world of then getting a book of poetry published by a bricks and mortar place that prints, real books. That's a different world, and the timeline on that is, old world.
Sure.
And then there's this world that I live in where you make music and you go out on tours and things start to happen and in that world, uh, things can happen faster than books of poetry do. But having said all of that, I've got pretty much another whole book of poetry that's ready to go. That sits in this computer. As because I get up every day and I do a little bit of writing. I do editing. I change things. It's not really writing, really. The world of writing is a world of rewriting. You're constantly
That's the secret,
redrafting
isn't it?
things. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, editing yourself, editing your ideas, and but I try to write every day, both poetry and song lyric, and I now every day I have to practice a 90-minute set for a Triumph tour, which I don't know what I was thinking.
Well, we'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there. Yeah, so
But
so
I mean, to me, there's a poem in this collection that is titled "Venting Rage at the Outrageous World," And that almost seems like it could have been an alternate title for the book, because a lot of these poems seem like you are reacting to things in the world, whether it's conspiracy theories or the current political landscape, or and it makes sense when you talk to when you say that you get up every morning and you write, because a lot of these things do have that sort of, as I said, reactive sense about it.
Yeah, and I think um, we call it poetry, but of course, I'm probably more naturally a lyricist.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of song, which is to say lyric, is that you're sort of like this, and this is a very common metaphor thing that's in the book of a troubadour, a
Right.
court jester. And that's kind of this persona that I inhabit, you know, and comfortably, because in that way you're not really a member of the court. You're an outsider.
Right.
And I think poets in general, that idea of you're looking at the world and then you're going to somehow chronicle, make a story about, uh, you know, what is it doing to you as an artist? Uh, what does it mean? You know, I think poets are, all writers are always searching for truth and meaning and those kinds of things. So, there's nothing crazy unique about me in that regard. And leaning into it is just, I'm getting older. And so the whole thing of aging and thinking, okay, what do I want to leave? And is it just going to be, the heavily successful, optimistic songs of triumph? Is it going to be, a court jester in spandex pants jumping around? And there's been in the Canadian experience, there's been people like Gord Downey, Leonard Cohen. There's a pretty strong thing that exists there, which is legit. And so writing, there's that thing where if people superficially sort of looked at me, they would go, "Well, that's a pretty you know, superficial kind of guy." And this goes back to what you said about, first impressions, and people are going to go, "What, a book of poetry?"
Right.
But I always felt like it was sort of my gig to play with that, to sort of, it's hard to try to find the words for this. Screw with people's expectations. Like I feel like that's kind of the job of a court jester, is to surprise people and try to provoke them and make them think. And certainly we live in a world where there's an awful lot of provocation, on a lot of levels. And so, I do end up reacting to that, and then figuring, okay, you want to, hurl a stone or a brickbat in my general direction. Here, I'll put something down on paper and I'll throw some shit back at you. So, you know, and it's not like I feel like the older I get, the more humble I become. Um, and yet, when you're getting older, you're also becoming, you don't care as much what other people think. You're willing
Right.
to sort of, you know, it's almost like, the whole thing of somebody walking along the street and there's the pile of shit and they go, ooh, and I just go, I'm going to step in it, I,
Well, I
I'm,
don't know if that's the greatest metaphor I've ever come up with, but
well,
I'll take
I
it. Yeah.
think it's a pretty good one because there's an awful lot of shit on the streets right now. There's an awful lot of it, and
Uh-huh.
am I contributing to it? Well, that's a good question. I don't know.
Uh-huh.
But at least I'm sort of saying, look, there's a pile of shit.
Yeah.
Good thing we didn't step in it,
Uh-huh. Is poetry
Anyways.
something that you've a way you've kind of approached topics like this and this sort of writing about your life for a long time, or is this something that's come to you later in life? Were you a lyricist first?
Well, It's
Or
funny in this
I know it's
in
a gray
this
area, you know.
yeah, and in in this avalanche of interviews that I'm doing, somebody had asked sort of the same thing about, where did you start? When you're a kid and you're in school, you're writing short stories and you're writing little poems, and people are trying to provoke you to do everything, to try
Mm,
it. And I grew up sort of in school in the late 50s and the 60s, and at that time, there was an awful lot of sort of conscientious. We're going to make you write essays. We're going to, you're going to learn how to write in
right.
cursive. These kinds of very old-fashioned notions. And I started out writing sort of lots of stuff, but by the time I was about 9 or 10, I got a guitar, and then I started writing songs.
Right.
But that's not to say that I hadn't been writing all kinds of stuff. I wasn't one of those kind of people that kept journals,
Mm,
but I always did a lot of writing and would have, workbooks and notebooks and pieces of paper floating around and file folders and things. It was just stuff. So, yeah. And I think to answer your question, there's a thing that happens where it's not just a question of what you're generating, it's a question of how is the world reacting to what you generate. And fairly early on in my life, it was like, oh, this guy's a singer, this guy's a guitar player, you guys in a band, and these things start to happen. And then you start to think of yourself, well, I'm a singer songwriter, I'm a guitar player. And so the poet thing kind of slides off. But you wouldn't be a singer songwriter of the level that you're at if you didn't have some sort of poet in you, if you didn't
right.
have a kind of when I got asked to be a magazine columnist because of my guitar success, that I did a monthly column, and it was no problem to add that to my, like, you know um they always had three or four of them sitting waiting to be
Right.
printed because I was a writer, and I would write. A magazine column was no different to me than a song or a poem, it was just writing. So yeah. So did that answer your question? I hope it
Yeah, I
did.
think so. I mean, I would think that in some sense, these poems are maybe, I mean, they feel like they just sort of come out. They don't feel necessarily as, and this is going to be a backhanded compliment, but they don't necessarily feel as fussed over or as crafty as lyrics. And I think maybe that's just a function of lyrics having to sort of fit into a more tightly constructed box, you know? Where you have to have a rhyme scheme and you have to have a meter. And whereas with these, they can just kind of flow along on their own, you know?
I do enjoy the fact that poetry gives you a little bit of a freer rein, but there's a rein, like
Mm,
that. There's parameters, and sometimes, I mean, it's nice to not be in the box of, but it's funny, that, like, the book that I have sitting now, I start out, and the first chunk of it, like, I think of my writing subdividing itself into parts, and the parts end up being sort of chapters of. So the first one in the new book is called Architecture, and I start out writing sonnets and villanelles, and so I'm trying to explore form,
right.
and which of course lyrics always imposed that. So yes, um, you're right to perceive that it may be flowing a little, but I do edit pretty hard, and I'll go back, and there'll be lots of stuff that goes into the garbage can,
Right.
and or I'll write, I don't know, 20 lines, and I'll only keep two, as
Right.
it evolves. My theory, and I used to teach this to college students about songwriting, is like you apply the Major League Baseball average thing to your work, because you'll be in the Hall of Fame if you can get 3 out of 10.
Right.
But your average person's getting about 2.5 out of 10. That's how they keep their job. You drop to 2 out of 10, you're in trouble. you might not keep your contract. You get sent down to the minors.
The thing I
Um,
find interesting about that analogy too, though, is in perspective. I mean, I don't know if this is true for you, but I find that if I when I'm writing something, it's eventually you just go, okay, that's good enough. I can't, and you're never 100% happy with it. Maybe rarely, but most of the time you're like, screwed up again or whatever. And then I find that if I go back and look at something I wrote 20 years ago or 10 years ago or whatever, I read it and go, hey, that's not bad. I
yes.
mean, time sort of erases or smooths out all that stuff that you thought about when you were in the creation of it. I mean, do you have that
Yeah,
phenomenon?
yes and no,
Okay.
because of course you're talking to a guy that's literally rehearsing songs that I wrote 50 years ago, and
Uh huh.
and 45 years ago, and my job is to find what's good about them and then make it seem like I'm just so happy to be playing these again, and sharing them with an audience right here in this moment. So, and a friend of mine, Terry Fallis, is a novelist, and his Substack this morning, which I saw in my feed, was he talks about a conversation that he and I had where we were talking about he used to have this theory about art and you know creativity and blah blah blah, and he had a three-legged stool was his sort of metaphor, and I was saying it's not right, Terry, like, because you're not taking into account the performative aspect of whatever it is that you're doing, whether you're writing a poem or you're writing a novel or you're writing a song. Eventually there's an audience, and it has to have an audience. If you don't have a reader, you got nothing. If you haven't got somebody to listen to your song, you got nothing. So, well, not nothing, but there's a big difference between.
But you
I'm going to
can't write
keep
for the
picking.
audience, right? You have to write for yourself. It's kind of a
Yes,
catch
that's
22.
right. But and I used to say this and get in trouble for this because I'm not politically correct. And you chastised me already once about my metaphor about stepping in a pile of shit, but. Um, there's a big difference between masturbation and group sex. There's a huge difference.
Uh-huh.
So art, if you're just trying to satisfy yourself,
Uh-huh.
it's not the same thing
Right.
as other stuff that's more performative. That's really how it works. There's no industry for writing of anything. And of
Mhm.
course, the writing of poetry, it's not a very
Not as
large
much.
industry. Yeah, it's like making jazz records. It's like it's not a
Uh-huh.
very big crowd.
Yeah.
So, but I do, when you talk about writing for yourself, and when I perform for myself, I do want jazz in what I do. I do want a more literature than just you know um, chewing bubble gum. Like
Right.
I want it to have a little bit of substance to it. I'm trying to figure out how to put meat and sinew and tendon to the bone.
Well, I think you
But anyhow,
succeeded here. I mean, as I said, these are not some wistful, ethereal. These are ripped from the headlines, as it
I know,
were.
but it made me laugh when you said about it's not just about a tree or a rock or something, because of course poetry in its very fundamental kinds of forms,
Uh-huh.
and the poets that are really good ones, they are writing about nature,
Totally.
because nature is like that's Mother Nature is the greatest storyteller of them all.
Mm-hmm.
So uh, there, I think poetry has to be making those kinds of integrated connections, you
Mm-hmm.
know, uh, and human nature, which hard to change it.
Well,
The
yeah.
centuries go by, and hard to
Uh-huh.
change the way people behave and the way people think and the way they act. And of course, my poetry book, is full of that kind of
Yes.
carping and venting.
Yes. Yes. Well, and
Yes.
okay. Speaking of change, people's minds changing. Let's talk. A year ago, a little less than a year ago, the last time we spoke, and this is something you had said to me and countless other people for decades. Um, Not going to do it. Not interested. Don't want to do it. Not going to happen. No, no, no. When we last spoke, you were about to go off to Europe with your wife, take a trip, which I think there's a poem in the book about that, maybe a couple. And you were saying that at that point, you were maybe thinking that if you didn't dislike to travel too much, you might do a couple of solo shows in connection with the Telecaster book, but that was it. I'm happy. Sitting in my chair. I'm happy to stay at home and write. And then all of a sudden, what the hell, man? So
I know.
what was the big thing that made you go from no, no, no to finally saying yes? And here's the thing. If it was just that they finally put enough zeros on that check,
No,
that's a valid reason.
yeah, but it had nothing to do with that.
So
I
what
mean,
then?
you can't necessarily say it had nothing to do with it, but that was a very, very small part of what went down. And I I sympathize with you, buddy. Like
Oh no,
I'm
no, we're everybody's happy. You said yes. Don't get me wrong. Nobody. I'm
no,
just
no, but I get
yeah.
it,
Uh-huh.
and yes, the hypocrisy of humanity is quite something, and I'm a perfectly good example of it. As I said to my wife when we were out walking last night, I go, yeah, yeah, I know, I'm a hypocrite. Yes,
No, I don't think so.
I'm
You
full
changed
of,
your mind, and that's a good thing. I mean,
yeah,
that is a sign of maturity and thoughtfulness. I'm just curious as to
sure,
what broke the dam. You
yeah,
know?
okay. Well, first of all, the process of putting out 10 Telecaster tales, and which was instead of just being about poetry, it was or writing, it was about making music again in a very performative kind of way. And I did exactly what I said I would do. I went out and played a couple of things, and I went, hey, if you do these things right, if you do them and
Mm-hmm.
they're planned properly, then there's still an audience that's interested in what I do. You know, so that was kind of like, a little bit eye opening. Then the spring of 2025 happened, and I went to Europe. You mentioned that, and
Mm-hmm.
well, so you're doing airplanes and you're doing hotels again, and I'm going, well, I survived that. It was, not a full month, but 3 weeks in Europe kind of thing. And it was like, yeah, this is, and I'd never been to Paris before. And that was something. The Louvre and Versailles and Musée d'Orsay, like places that you just kind of go, I could have spent 2 weeks in Musée d'Orsay and I still wouldn't have gotten close to what's there. So then all of that stuff kind of that changes you and it makes you kind of go, oh, um, the world is wide and it takes all kinds. And so then the NHL started using Lay It on the Line in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and it was getting played like every commercial break. They kept using that song, and so there was kids getting out their phones and holding up Shazam and going, "Who's singing that? What song is that? What band is that?" And the song ended up charting again in Canada because of TV and hockey playoffs, and so this is a world that I'd sort of, as I move further and further into poetry and writing and into my retirement, that world of mass media and what it can do, what it does routinely. Um, and then they go, "What, you want to come out to Edmonton and play a gig? You can." And so it was like this thing. And Gil, the drummer of Triumph, was talking. He'd always wanted to launch a Triumph virtual kind of. So it was like all of this stuff was now becoming possible for him, But it was like, well, we got to get Rik on board. You don't have anything if you don't have Rik. You got to have Rik. So, it's nice to be wanted. It's nice to be needed, you
Sure.
know. Uh, all of that started to make me go, well, I don't know. Let me think about this. And then I sat down with my wife, and I was going to do the thing of, pros and cons. And I went, okay, well, let's just start with the pros first because, and I said, okay, the first one is I would likely have to get myself in shape and like really get myself in shape. And she said, stop. That's what other reason do you need? Why do we even have to have this conversation? You now have this carrot that, will, it's a golden. I keep talking in metaphors. But it was like, well, okay, so I'm going to do it. I mean, so then, fast forward, we've just got through Christmas and New Year's, and it's like, for Christmas, my wife bought me uh, personal trainer sessions, and I have now been seeing my personal trainer, who's great. I love the guy, and I hate planks, but like I have an elliptical machine right there. See that thing?
Uh-huh.
I call that Darth Vader. Um, anyhow, yeah, like that sort of became the thing. It was like, well, you're going to get yourself in shape and then get to revisit all of these songs again. And I'll just turn this around so you can see. Uh, all of these
Right.
guitars are now getting a daily workout, and it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun to be smashing my chops back into shape, and the double neck weighs over 12 pounds, which I
Yes.
don't like, but you know, um, yeah, it's just kind of like last kick at the can, maybe, but it's going to be fun. Okay, but and I'm going to just add this because we could talk about this for forever, but the management guy that we have in their company, Vortex, and they manage Peter Frampton. And
Mhm.
Frampton got at a point in time got a diagnosis that was like, "Hey, you've got this terminal thing.
Yeah.
Uh,
Right.
it's not gonna. It's just gonna take a long time to kill you, but eventually, But nobody gets out of this thing alive. And Frampton said, "Okay, well, I'm gonna go out and do one last tour if I can." And he needed a cane, or he needed help to get out on stage, and he sits. But he started to play, and it was like he got a new lease on life. And he said to
Mhm.
the management, "If you can keep booking shows, I want to keep touring. I'm going to keep doing this." And I mean, I was resharing something the other day on social media about um, like BB King lived into like 88 or something, and Chuck Berry made it into his 90s, and
Mhm.
so there are some guys that just kept playing guitar, right? Segovia lived into his 90s. So I go, okay, well, maybe it'll help keep me alive, if I do it. So because the poetry thing might have been killing me. No, I'm kidding. That was,
So,
yeah.
how's it been? You kind of alluded to this earlier in terms of reconnecting with those songs. These are things you did 50 years ago. You're not the same guy now that you were then. So, how do you sort of get back into that place of, as you said, singing these songs and feeling these songs and selling these songs and making them building that connection again between you and the songs and the audience.
Yeah, I'm just going to go sort of one step at a time and one day at a time, and it's a gradual process, and it'll eventually get to some shows, and then we'll start, and certainly you try to build it so that there's more safety nets than there used to be, that the show is paced better, the guitars are not tuned in concert pitch, like there's
I was going to ask about
yeah, there's all of these adjustments that you
yeah.
make. Yeah.
I mean, I'm guessing, as you said, playing wise, I'm guessing your muscle memory kicks in at some point, and the songs come back. Um, okay, it's a process.
Yeah.
But I would think the vocals would be kind of a challenge because you were singing some and wearing some tight trousers and singing some high notes back in those days.
Yes. Yeah. Um, yeah, all of those things you have to account for in one way or another. And of course, we're not just going to go out as a three-piece band like we did when we first started. We're going to go out as a five-piece, maybe six. Levine, I don't know if Mike Levine's going to be with us or not.
I thought he was out.
Sorry.
I thought Mike was not going to do any of it, or is he going to do some of
Yeah.
it, or is he
Well,
decided?
yeah, See, we live in a technological time, so he can participate on a kind of a virtual,
Oh, okay.
technical kind of level. You can have him as a participant.
Hmm.
I mean, the Grateful Dead goes out and they've got Jerry Garcia on the screens. Like,
Right.
there's ways you can do things, because these 3D holographic kinds of screens they have now, it's just unbelievable, the technology. And Triumph was always kind of known for that. So,
Right.
and there's an irony to all of this that, I'm sitting here talking to you about a poetry book, which is kind of as entry level as you get in terms of arts. And now I'm going to go back out on this tour, and my God, the technology it's great. So, and that's a big part of it. That I mean, I can play through a pedal board this big, and it can do what it used to take a wall of, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's ways around everything, and that's not to say that uh, the Triumph approach is to try and you know, when we first started and we would tour Canada, there would be an awful lot of critics that would just write, "Well, yeah, all sizzle, no steak." It's all they're phony. This is not real. But it was real, and there were songs that were good enough and real enough that here we are, 4 or 5 decades later. Those songs require justice, and so as a performer, as a poet, I feel like no, I there's a conscience and a consciousness that I need to bring to this stuff in order
Hmm.
to make it be what it deserves to be and what my audience deserves, and what I deserve in terms of grace and dignity and all of those kinds of things when you're a
Right.
senior citizen. Like, I don't want to do it, and I'm not going to wear spandex pants. You know what I mean? That's not going to
It won't
happen.
be the hand coming out of the spandex pants.
Yeah, 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 exactly. But am I going to try to really enjoy it and have fun? Yes. Am I going to try to celebrate it? Yes. And when I write poems, to bring it back to
Uh-huh,
what we're
uh-huh,
supposed to be
uh-huh.
talking about, you know, do I want to always be doom and gloom, or do I always want to be, you know, so serious that no, I don't like. I don't think that's what good poetry does. I think good poetry tries to be comprehensive, and uh, I'll go back to Cohen. Uh, he wasn't a very good singer, and yet he won male
Scandalous.
vocalist of the year,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
made good fun of that,
Yeah.
and he was a pretty dark kind of guy coming from a pretty serious place, but his best poems were about, you know, there's a crack in everything, and that's where the light gets in.
And he was
Like,
also a playful guy. He would, if you saw those last tours, he was skipping around the stage, loving it. So,
because he was alive, and
exactly.
you're celebrating being alive. So in a way, I mean, I have a bit of a unique thing because I have been a rock star and apparently still am on a certain level. And but I write poetry, and I purport to be a relatively serious minded kind of human being. I've taught in an academic environment for a couple of decades, so uh, there's things that I can bring to this that are perspective things that not necessarily a lot of folks have, so I'm hoping that maybe that makes it, you know people get curious,
For sure.
hopefully.
Have you guys hammered out a set list yet, or is that still a thing in pro? Okay, so you know what you're doing.
uh do I know what I'm doing?
Well, okay, those are two separate questions.
Do I know what I'm doing? We have I have a set list sitting on a music stand over there, and I've been practicing it, but we have not got together yet as a unit.
Oh, okay.
But that's going to happen soon. Gil and I will just start bashing at the studio next week once the blizzard passes.
Hmm.
And
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 Phil
he's
X is going to be involved,
yeah,
from what I
and
understand.
Todd Kearns on
Okay.
bass and vocals, and the guy can sing. Like this is when I talked about safety nets. We're going to have these other guys that
Hmm.
are really highly skilled. Brent Fitz on
Huh.
drums, and like yeah, so
Brent's an old friend of mine. He's a Winnipegger. We used to teach drums at the same place when we were
oh,
teenagers.
okay,
Yeah.
there you go. And
Yeah.
these guys are, they've toured with Slash and they've toured with Alice
Yep.
Cooper and like they know the drill. And
Yep.
so it's like, you guys know the drill? Great, because I might be falling down on occasion and I'm going to need propping up. And they go, don't worry, we've done that. We know what we're doing. And so that's I'm actually, like, we had a moment when we were in Edmonton and we did the thing. We did three songs, right? But we were in the trailer before we went on, and we decided we'll practice singing the chorus of "Lay It on the Line," just the harmonies, warm up, and it was a great moment of hearing this harmony, this really good, solid, rich harmony. And I went, man, if we ever go on tour, I am going to exploit that so much, like because it
Yeah.
was something that in its original incarnation, Triumph didn't really have that element, So now I go, ah, there's stuff on the table that I can play with, that I can do things with, that I always wanted to do, but
Hmm.
so that's a good thing. I get energized by that, and it makes me look forward. Like we're going to play, I don't know, 25 or 6 or some shows in 60 days,
Hmm.
and that chunk of time from April through to beginning of June, that's going to really be something in my life. That's really
Definitely.
going to be something where I'm going to find out about me in a lot of new ways. And that's exciting. That's an ass kicking. But I feel that way when I sit down to write anything. I feel
Hmm.
like the job is I'm supposed to be finding out who I am and why did I choose to make the choices that I made. And um, so, leaning into it was definitely about that, for sure.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, it does. As I said, it all ties together. It's the poetry book and the tour and everything. So if this goes as well as you would like it to, do you think that this might lead to some other Triumph related activity? Have you even thought about writing some new material for the
I
band?
al I
Okay.
always think about writing. So, yeah, and is there stuff in my notebooks that, this could potentially be a Triumph song? Sure. Yeah, but a lot of times I go, yeah, well, that's not going to happen. So, and do we live in an age where the making of new records is really like you're sort of, being as old fashioned in your notions,
Well,
but
not necessarily. I'm not talking about a double concept album with an orchestra, but a new song perhaps that you could then, just put online.
The last year has taught me that anything's possible.
And
Anything is.
probably that we shouldn't believe anything you say anyway, right?
Were you just shaking your finger at me? Yes. I, yeah, don't believe me. I'm just, I'm just the court jester here. I
Uh-huh.
don't know. Don't take me seriously. I, yeah, like I said, I got a poetry book in the can. I've got songs in the can. I've got some little. I just did a project with a guy named Alan Shoesmith. Then it went on, like he's big on the Spotify streaming thing, and it was this
Mhm.
really quiet, gentle two acoustic guitars, and it went great. It was doing great numbers. Like I'm
Oh
talking
yeah.
hundreds of thousands of streams. I'd probably get a check for $37.
Yeah.
You
Well, yeah,
know,
exactly.
yeah, but
If
but
that.
but nevertheless, Alan was really happy, and I was really happy. And he said, "We should do this again." And I said, "We should. Yeah, that's great. But the Triumph thing, if it goes good, somebody's going to go, "Hey, we should do this again." And I know there will be agents and
Yeah.
Live Nation and people that will be going, "Come on, let's do this again." Like this tour, they're not going to hit West Coast, no California, no
Right.
Oregon, no Washington, no BC. So it's like, oh, brother,
You got
that's
a
the
second
shoe
leg
that's.
there. And I mean, were you guys big in Europe back in the day? Is there potentially a market for you over there if you wanted to do it?
We did England twice and Scotland once, and we said we're never coming back.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, and it was just because it was so expensive to tour there that you
Mm,
couldn't make any money, whereas we could go to, St. Louis and play 3 shows,
right.
So it was kind of like, well, that, that's a no-brainer. And we
Mm-hmm.
never did continental Europe ever.
Mm.
And I went to Japan myself once, but Triumph never did.
Mm.
So never did Australia, And
I
we
mean, are
had
those things
some,
you would like to do, or do you think it's just more of a North American
I don't
phenomenon?
care. Like,
Yeah.
honestly, I don't care. Like,
Hmm.
do I like 14-hour flights? No, I do not.
Sure.
Would I rather sleep in my own bed?
Hmm.
Yes. So I mean, that's just human nature. But, you know, um, there's a good reason why the Rolling Stones still do what they do because they can make it be so that you're like having a 5-star experience the whole
Hmm.
damn time. And then the 90 minutes you spend on stage is the most fun of it all, you
Yeah.
know? So, and I can sort of see that. I can see why that would be attractive. But, you know, I also know, that I do have arthritis medication, so
Well,
there
sure. Yeah.
is
I mean, after
there.
40, it's all about stretching and, you know.
Yeah. So motion is lotion, apparently, they say.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So there's all of these other kinds of things where you go, well, we'll see. There's no guarantees.
Yeah.
And we make all these plans and okay, maybe, but if when you're a creative person, you sit down to write a poem, it's an act of good faith. Everything is,
Hmm.
so all of this stuff, live concerts, tours, books, albums, uh, I'm at an age and stage where it's all just kind of fun for me. It's all just kind of gravy now,
Right.
and so um, I want to really enjoy that, and I don't care if I'm, you know, uh, doing a poetry book for ECW Press. I go, well, that's good. That's noble. That's fine. That's a perfectly satisfying vehicle of expression. And I don't find it to be any different than strapping on a Les Paul and cranking the amp up and jumping around a little bit with, some guys that are a decade and a half my juniors. And like I think it's all kind of like it's all kind of one thing now, it's all
Hmm.
just kind of one, it's blending together. I mean,
Yes.
I can't do a poetry uh,
Tour.
interview without it crossing over into the
Uh-huh.
rock star thing. I
Well, no,
can't
because
do a rock
those all
star
fit
thing.
together. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
this is where it all sort of came together. And so
Uh-huh.
is what you're dealing with.
Well, and you can bring down the lights in the arena and put out a stool and put on your black turtleneck and do a poetry reading in the middle of the show.
Okay. I'll have a story for you.
Okay.
So, based on exactly what you just described.
Uh-huh.
So I got booked and I went down with my wife to Cancun, and this was November last year, and this was ostensibly a thing where it was like, well, Rick, it'll be like an intimate and interactive thing with you. And I went, okay, well, what is this? And they go, well, it's a resort, and people have paid big money to come to this thing, and they bring bands, and it's like a celebration of the MTV era. And I go, well, that
Okay.
went through a few different eras. Which era are we talking about? They go, well, like the 80s. I go, okay, well, fine. And you're a guy that you were on MTV and they want to book you and here's more money than than you deserve. Okay, and first class airfares, you and your wife, all expenses paid. Blah, blah, blah. Your agent wants to come, sure she can come and she can be there for a few days. And I go, okay, let's do
Hmm.
this. So I get down there and I'm thinking, like you just described, well, the lights will go down. I'll have my turtleneck. I'll do my poetry reading. I'll do a little of this, a little of that, get my acoustic guitar, play a couple of little things. And I went the night before that I was supposed to do my thing. I went to the hall that they were going to hold it in, and 38 Special was doing a thing. And they had crazy lights and they had a rear screen that was like the logo bursting into flames. And there was no seats. Everybody was standing at the barricade. Ah! And I went, oh no. What I've been planning is not going to work in these circumstances. And I went, okay. Plan B. So there's this guy, Eddie Trunk, and
Yeah.
he's, like he was going to interview me. And I said, Eddie, just keep leading me back to the Triumph stuff. I'll tell Triumph stories. I'll play some, we'll ask the crowd to make some suggestions, and I'll play a few bars of this and sing the chorus of that. We'll get them to sing. Like it's going to be a rock and roll experience. It's not going to be a poetry reading. So, and I managed to pull it off. It went fine. It went great. But it was like, yeah, change. And this event, they had like people that would like they'd have a black and white day, and everybody would be wearing like checkerboards and they're walking around and they had a rock band playing Guns N' Roses covers at 10:30 a.m. and you could be in the pool in front of the stage, like so it was one of these surreal things where um, people were retired,
Yeah.
people in their 70s, but they were acting like they were in their 20s and 30s still.
Yeah.
And I kind of went, do I belong here? I go, well, I'm the crown, I'm the court jester. I It's my job to sort of, sit and
Uh-huh.
make notes and
Yeah.
observe and participate and entertain when I can. And so I did, and I survived and I get a couple of poems out of it. So,
That's yeah. But I think that with these shows that you've got coming up, I think that you might be surprised, or maybe not. Maybe you're expecting this. Maybe you're anticipating this. But I kind of suspect they might be more emotional for you than you might expect at this point. Those the first time you guys get back on stage again and do these songs, and the reaction of the people who are in the crowd. Because I think yeah, you're going to see people of your age and my age, and you're also going to see their kids, and you're going to see the love
their
that they
grandkids.
yeah, and then you're going to see the love they've had for you, all these decades. I mean, it's one thing to think about where you are, which is the mechanics of getting this thing back up on its feet. But when you're actually doing it and seeing the reaction people have for this, are you prepared for that? Can you be prepared for that?
You know, um, I saw a clip the other day on Instagram, and somebody was asking James Hetfield of Metallica,
Uh-huh.
you know, how do you still get up for this? Like, how do you still make? And he said, it's easy. He says, all I
Mm-hmm.
have to do is just pick one person and look into their eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And when I make that connection, I get all the juice I need. I get all of the energy. I get a sense of it. Then I thought, yeah, I'll be able to get that. I'm going to have that opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And and I do like the moments where, if there's too much front light, the audience is just a sea of blackness. You can't make connections at all. But when there's backlight and it lights up the crowd, you can see everybody, and they like to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
They react like, yeah, he can see me now, and I like it. I remember and I know how great that can be. I also know that there were moments where I go, you don't have to take this thing too seriously. Like what you just mentioned is a personal thing. And that personal connection is really important to me.
Hmm.
The mass value of personal connection, I'm not as crazy about. There's a Nuremberg rally kind of
Right.
thing that rock shows can sort of,
The tribal
and
ritual.
yeah,
Yeah.
like I don't mind doing that with a, with a grin, but the tongue is in the cheek kind of thing. It's
Sure.
not really, I don't take that seriously. And I think if you do take that seriously, now you're creating a problem for yourself, where you might believe that you're much more important than you actually are,
No, no, I
because,
understand. Yeah, no, not wanting the hero worship, obviously, but
yeah, there's a celebration of the moment, which is
right.
it's a great thing. It's a
Right.
party thing. And Gil, my partner in Triumph, very much understands that. He's very much Triumph had a side of its personality, which was him, which was more of that,
Hmm.
we are rock star, live for the moment. We're gonna, live hard and die young. When,
When
um,
neither of you did.
yeah,
Well,
and
you
I
might have
was
done the
this guy.
first part, but not the second, thankfully.
Yeah. And I'm this guy going, oh, the magic power of the music and fighting the good fight and
Yeah.
holding on to your dreams and never surrender. And all of that stuff is really the ingredient that has made this thing last as long so that here we are again.
Hmm.
Um, Now, I'm going to try to tie this back to the writing of poetry. Uh, when you're in a creative act, and it's getting dark or sinister, or it's coming off the rails a little bit, and of course the rails are what we construct. um I always say, and I used to say this to writers all the time, you need to light a candle and put it in the window for me. I need to have a sense of something um optimistic here, of something that is beneficial for us both. The writer and the reader, the performer and the person in the audience. Like there has to be that for it to be of value to me. That's what I expect. And I would have students that would say, "No, fuck you, not no." Like this is dark, and I'm a dark person, and that I was in a dark place, and this is all about my darkness. I go, that's fine, but um, how are you going to find your way out of the darkness? Like that's good. Anybody that's reading the poem, they're probably going to get to the point where they're going, yeah, wow, am I going to be Sylvia Plath and fill my pocket with rocks? Like I, I, I think what we want to try and do is figure out how to get Sylvia to take the rocks out of her pocket and turn around and come back and write a poem about how cold the water was. Like
Hmm.
I that's what I think we should try to do. And I do believe that's a very Pollyanna-ish kind of, and it came from my mom, you know, uh, for sure that you're just trying to make the world a better place, which is incredibly simplistic, but
Well, sure, but
as I
it's
as
a
I
noble pursuit.
yeah, and I honestly, I mean, I wrote leaning into it at a time when Trump was, you know, fucking up the world, and
Hmm.
here he is again, and it's worse the second time around.
Right.
And so all we really want from those guys that get together in Davos is uh, more of an ethical kind of a behavior, more of a moral integrity, and and when Carney talks, he says, "This is what we need to do. Like let's be practical about this, and let's be moral." And I go, "It's simple, but it's hard."
Sure.
Yeah, simple is sometimes extremely hard because selfish and greedy is so easy.
Hmm.
It's the shortcut. And Trump wants a shortcut world. He doesn't give a fuck about the environment. He doesn't give a fuck about uh, children and an aging population and the climate and all of these kinds of things that are like, just try to do what's right. Like, Just try to do what's right. It's easy to say, it's so hard to do. So when you write poems and you make music, that's what I think you should try to do.
Yes, well, exactly. And again, as you said, simple in thought, harder in execution. But
Yes.
I just think the very fact that you're still doing it, both of these endeavors now, you know, the reaction obviously to you guys going back out again was huge and is going to be huge. And again, I would love to be a fly on the wall at that first show when you walk out and hear that sound that I don't think you've heard necessarily for a while. You know, that
No,
volume of people,
no,
you know.
but you don't forget it. Like I have pretty strong memories of,
Sure.
many different types of crowds and different kinds of environments.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, and we're going to try to figure out, like, as you can imagine, the way you get your feet wet is nice and slow. Like, we're going to go down to Orlando and we're going to do a couple of charity kinds of things that are,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Private type
yeah,
shows.
yeah, corporate kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to be rehearsing down there with the guys. And but so I'll backtrack. So Gil and I are going to start like literally next week, and we're going to be playing for a while. And then in March, we're going to fly all the guys in, and we're going to have rehearsals all together in Mississauga, probably at the Metalworks,
Right.
and we'll bash it out for a couple of weeks easy, maybe more, who knows. And then April, we go down to Orlando. We're going to rehearse there and then do a couple of these corporates. And then we're going to come back. And then we're going to go into a hockey rink, the Paramount in Mississauga, I think, and maybe spend a good 5 or 6 days there, dress
Right.
rehearsing, maybe do another kind of a corporate event. Think not sure about that. All the stuff is still coming together. Uh,
Right.
and then Gil wants to try and go to a place like, I don't know, Sudbury or someplace. And then we've got to go to Sault Ste. Marie, and we're going to move the thing into there, have a rehearsal in the arena, and then play a show there. And then we come back, and Scotiabank in Toronto is
Right.
April 21 or 22 or something. And then
22.
Hamilton the next night. And that's going to be the process of, we should be ready by the time that happens.
I would think.
But
And I mean, you're going to be filming the thing. I'm guessing at some point you're going to have a crew in filming this thing because there's obviously going to be some sort of a broadcast or some sort of a thing. I'm guessing in the works, video
yes,
wise. Yeah.
yeah, I don't get my nose involved in that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, but there's management involved, and
Yeah.
there's agents, and there's Live Nation.
It's a whole
Live
nut
Nation
in the
is
circus. You know.
Live Nation is literally like a how do I phrase this? They're an entity unto themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They're like a country. They're like a nation. Like they they have their own rules, and they're multinational, and they have their own. They own Ticketmaster, and they own the venues that you're playing in. And you
Mm-hmm.
go, okay, this is kind of like, all right. So for sure there will be things that come down from those places that will
Mm-hmm.
be, all right, here's the plan. And you'll go, wait a second, you know, I'm not sure I'm going to say yes to this.
Uh-huh.
So who
Yeah.
knows?
Well, you do what you can.
Yeah,
All right, my friend. Listen, I think I've probably taken up enough of your day. You've got to get up on the elliptical there and
I
do
do.
some miles, and
And
then move
today's a
over to the
guitar day
guitar.
more than anything.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. I'll give you
Yeah.
one
But
piece of advice though. When you get to Winnipeg and you're
yes.
introducing the band, you gotta leave a big window for Brent Fitz because he
Yes.
is beloved in this
Yes.
town. He's the mayor of Winnipeg. Trust me.
Good advice. Well, Todd's from out west too.
Hmm.
And of course, Phil has had all of this stuff with Bon Jovi,
Hmm.
where he's now got an extremely high profile as a guy. And so the first time I had to do some rehearsals with a little bit with Phil because we did the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame thing, and he and I performed "Lay It on the Line" with the house band. And but I was saying to Phil, no, I really want you involved. Like your personality, I want this. I want you to step up and be a guy. So I do know that uh, these guys are important. And in truth, I think the long range plan of Triumph is that eventually Gil and I will also be able to sort of, you know, evolve out, and then these other guys will inherit. And there's an allegiance to the songs, and then even more just to the ethos of what the band was about, which I'm hoping guys like, I feel good that a guy like Brent Fitz is going to be a guy that inherits that and is
Hmm.
going to, think of that as something that's now, I want him to feel like he's a shareholder, like,
Really? Okay. So you see
yeah,
this them as something more than just support musicians for this tour. You think of this as some kind of a passing of the torch.
exactly right. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a new one. That I don't think anybody's really. I mean, yeah, you've got your Leonard Skinnards and your Creedence Clearwater, whatever they are is now, where you've got in the suite who are now touring without any original members. So you're kind of not only reanimating Triumph, but trying to restart it in a longer term direction.
Yeah. And I think a model you could look at, all of those things that you mentioned, true. And there's a whole thing that exists. Journey goes out and they play the same songs, and then
Right.
and Styx goes out, and Foreigner goes out, and Def Leppard goes out, and so there are these bands and we're sort of new into this thing
Mm-hmm.
of that there's franchise brand names that can be, re-exploited concert
Mm-hmm.
season after concert season. Um, but the Grateful Dead did a thing where they
Right.
brought John Mayer in, and uh, I've seen how that works, where Garcia shows up, and now of course Bob Weir's passed away. So, but that franchise idea, and that makes it sound,
Mercenary.
yeah, and
Yeah.
and 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 it is
Yeah, no, I
like
get it, but it's also
not,
a way to because the music has been gone for so long. There has not been Triumph for decades now, and again, people, as you obviously have seen from the interest in the reunion and the ticket sales and all the other stuff, people want this. It's a huge part of their life that they are thrilled to have back, and it makes. I totally understand the concept of what you're saying, which is restarting it with this larger group of people, and then you and Gil at some point backing away to maybe the point of not doing whole tours but doing parts of the tour or to doing specific shows, and then maybe you retiring and passing the vocals to somebody else or whatever.
yeah.
It makes
and
sense.
and as I was saying, like Grateful Dead have
Hmm.
done a kind of a, there's something more meaty, more something of more value in the way that they went about it. And Queen has done the same thing too, where
Right.
you're ending up having Broadway shows, and but there's a thing about Queen which is uh, it's a thing that will never die.
Hmm.
Um, but you got to have things that breathe the new life into it.
Hmm.
And so that I'm hoping that the Triumph thing will be its own thing, you know. But I do look at the Grateful Dead and Queen in particular and kind of go, yeah, they did some things right. That
Right.
I definitely hope we're doing that as well.
Yeah, and it
Um,
is it is a path forward as opposed to this just being a victory lap.
yeah,
Right.
exactly right. Yes, yeah. And even if it's only that, even if
Hmm.
it only ends up being a victory lap, it'll be a victory lap that has something uh, sweet and deep as part of what's going on. It's not just a marketing gaffe or
Right.
a brand name kind of franchising. It's not like McDonald's opening another store down the block. You know,
No,
I
no,
I
no.
want it to be something more meaningful than that. And back to your point, I think having a guy like Brent Fitz involved is that's the right way to be trying to do this. You know, those
Mm-hmm.
guys, when I met those guys and I got to sit with them and rehearse with them, I went, oh, there's something really right about this. And not just right, righteous, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So,
For
anyways,
sure.
blah, blah.
All right, man. Well, listen. Thanks again for all your time. I look
You're welcome.
forward to this tour, and like everybody else in Canada. And we'll see you somewhere down the line. Probably when you publish that next book of poetry.
All right, man. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a good day.
Take care. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye bye.